Probably the Japanese thrust mines, or as they called them, the Chitotsubakurai, are some of the most interesting anti-tank weapons of the Second World War, one would even dare to say of all time. In its short period of service, it became a symbol of the Japanese Empire. These grenades were created by the Japanese Empire in 1944 to try to stop the Allied advance on land in any way possible. Since they were used practically in the final stage of the conflict, there are almost no records of their effectiveness, but we still know quite a lot about them. These mines were definitely really terrifying for any Allied armored vehicle. At a 90-degree angle, it was capable of piercing 150 millimeters of homogeneous laminated armor, and being at a bad 60-degree angle, it was capable of piercing 100 millimeters, enough to penetrate the armor of the Germans without problems. And also, as the users of these mines approached from the sides or from behind the tanks, they were almost always detonated in vulnerable areas of the target tanks. The operation of this is the same as the German anti-tank systems, literally using hit charges. It basically works by exploding TNT inside. The conical shape of the mine redirects the entire explosion to a central point, pushing a jet of molten metal into a small point, causing the armor to easily give way. As you may know, for these types of devices to work effectively, precise placement at the correct distance and angle is necessary. The Destocked mine has 3 legs that, contrary to what people think, is not a detonator, but rather a method to distance the grenade from the armor at the exact point to do the maximum possible damage. 15 centimeters exactly. The operation was simple. When the user was ready to use the grenade, they had to remove a clip that was at the base of the cone and the shaft. Then the user had to run and hit the tank with a bit of force. This caused the shaft to advance inside the vertex of the cone, releasing the safety of the striker and launching it against the detonator's blasting cap, causing the mine to explode and, of course, eliminating the tank in the process. Many people think that the Destocked mines were thrown at the tanks as if they were javelins, which is completely wrong since they weighed 6.5 kilograms. Unless there was a Japanese soldier who was an Olympic javelin thrower, this was a bit impossible. And even though the shaft had a diameter of 2 meters, the explosion of 3 kilos of trinitrotoluene perfectly reached the user of the mine, who inevitably received lethal injuries when using this. More than anything, the injuries were caused by the residues of the explosion, and obviously by the explosion itself, so this weapon was not designed for the user to survive its use, although there would always be the remote possibility of surviving the explosion. In my point of view, this mine doesn't make much sense. This mine seems to be a copy of the German anti-tank systems based on HIT explosives. It would have been a better idea to simply copy the German Halfadung magnetic mine or grenade, which showed great effectiveness on the Eastern Front and gave the user time to take cover, in addition to being much more effective and probably quite cheap to produce. It was so effective that the Germans created the Panzerfaust and the Panzerschreck from this system. They could also have copied the Panzerfaust, which eliminated the need for soldiers to expose themselves to enemy fire, further guaranteeing the impact against the target, and of course safeguarding the user's life. The Japanese really created anti-tank weapons similar to American bazookas, but in a very limited way. The thrust mine seems a bit cheaper to produce than all the options previously mentioned. But isn't it more expensive to lose a valuable, trained and experienced soldier? There were many examples of really dangerous weaponry that endangered the lives of Japanese users, like the Type 97 grenade, which according to many experts was the most ineffective of the entire Second World War. It used a rope that had to be pulled and then had to be hit against a hard object to start the fuse, causing many times the Japanese to throw grenades that did not explode because they were not activated correctly. These explosive weapons show us how desperate the Japanese Empire was towards the final stages of the conflict against the Allies. The kamikazes and the lunge mines were clearly seeking at any cost to reverse the Allied advance. There are very few records of the effectiveness of the lunge mine. A U.S. study done in March of 1945 stated verbatim, and one quote, "To date, all enemy attempts using the lunge mine against our tanks have failed." One T also describes it as perhaps the rarest anti-tank mine we have seen. The mine probably failed because the user had to run up to the tank. Tanks are usually always in groups of several and are almost always guarded by infantry, so it was difficult for a soldier to run up to the tanks and detonate the lunge grenade. According to this report, it was only used on the island of Leyte, the Philippines, and finally in Manila. Even though the Japanese Empire fell after 1945, this grenade reappeared in Vietnam, being used by North Vietnam against the French in the First Indochina conflict. Without a doubt, the Japanese lunge mines are a testament to the little value that the generals of the armies that used these weapons placed on the lives of their men, showing that they were willing to pay any price for victory.